This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, and welcome to the 14th episode of the Hooved Animal Humane Society's Saturday Seminar Series. For 52 years, the Hooved Animal Humane Society has advocated for the humane treatment of all hooved animals through education, legislation, investigation, and, if necessary, legal intervention. HAHS also provides physical rehabilitation to animals that have endured severe neglect and abuse and adopts them out to new homes. Each month, we are so lucky to have veterinarians and subject matter experts educate us on topics near and dear to our hearts as animal owners and lovers. Today, we are talking about small ruminants. Dr. Sara Beth Speziok is a mixed animal veterinarian in Newberry, Florida. She graduated with her Doctor of Veterinary Medicine from the University of Florida College of Vet Med. While there, she completed the college's Food Animal Medicine certificate program and became known as the one who knows goat things. Prior to vet school, she earned a master's in public health and practices her passion for public health every day. In the few and far between off hours she has, Dr. Speziok enjoys spending time with her husband, riding horses, and writing about her life as a mixed animal veterinarian. Welcome, Dr. Speziok.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
And we are going to turn the controls over to you.
Awesome. I was going to say, if you'll make me a presenter again, I think we had to redo that. I don't have a share screen option. All right.
Okay.
Get some clicks done here. Can you see my screen okay?
Absolutely.
All right, perfect. Well, then I will go ahead and get started. So I am Dr. Sara Beth Speziok. Like Jen said, I'm a mixed animal veterinarian. Today, my plan is to talk about some of the basics of caring for goats and sheep, but we are going to cover a couple of their friends as well, specifically cattle and then camelids. So typically that's going to be alpacas.
Caring for goats and sheep. And
am I still good to keep going? No? All right, I think so. We'll keep going then. All right, so another little about me. I really love goats, as you can probably tell from this picture. My clinic that I work at is actually called Springhill Equine, and so by the name, they were primarily equine before I started with them. But now I currently see lots of horses still, goats, sheep, cattle, camelids, and then dogs and cats as well. Occasionally I'll see a pig or a chicken. And a lot of my favorite clients and best clients are sort of hobby farmers and people that are new to livestock and may just be getting into them to have pets or to potentially, produce meat or milk or fiber. So that's something that I'm super interested in. Oh no, I heard you can't hear me. Let's see here. My mic is on. It says that you can hear me. Oh, technology is rough. My mic is on. It says you have mic issues again. Let's see. Do we think someone can put in the chat if you guys can hear me? Because Jen says she can't, but I don't know if you guys can. Let's see.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm back.
Tess can hear me. Okay.
Please.
No worries. I'm going to keep going and just yell at me. You guys can unmute and yell at me if you can't hear me for some reason. And I will do my absolute best to fix it. All right. So the first thing that I wanted to speak about today is something called a VCPR. What that stands for is a veterinarian client-patient relationship. And what that is it's basically a relationship and agreement between veterinarians, their clients, and obviously their patients. And so what that allows me to do as a veterinarian, if I've got one, is to prescribe medications, determine treatment protocols, and things like that. What I need to create that VCPR is generally a physical exam on the animal in question within the past year. Now, when we're talking about things like herd animals, then it can also be, a look at the entire herd. So it doesn't have to be that I put my hands on every single cow in a herd of 100, but I need to know something about that herd and how it's run. I need to have been to the facility in person to have that VCPR. That gives me legal authority to prescribe medications. And you need me to have that legal authority to prescribe medications for you to get those prescription medications. Why is that important? Well, again, prescription medications require that. A big thing that's happening this year is that a lot of antibiotics that were previously over-the-counter medications are going to be coming behind the counter. They're going to be becoming prescription medications only. There's a large population of hobby farmers and people, sort of smaller producers that make it a habit of just purchasing antibiotics and other medications for their animals without having a relationship with a veterinarian. And that is the reason why the FDA has chosen to take those products off the shelves, because we're having some major antibiotic resistance issues and things like that. So it's just really important for you to know that you need to have a good relationship with the veterinarian for all of the animals that you own. So if you've got a dog or a cat, hopefully you take them to the vet on a somewhat regular basis. Usually people with horses take those horses to the vet as well, or have the vet come to them. But for some reason, goats and sheep tend to get left in the dust a little bit. They need veterinarians as well. I will say, there's sometimes a shortage of us out there that are really, really interested in goats and sheep, but the best way to make more of us is to have the patients available for us to treat. The other reason why I bring up a VCPR today is because, at least to my knowledge, I am not the veterinarian for any of you, being that I'm in Florida, and I'm guessing the majority of you are not. So I'm not the veterinarian for any of you or your animals. So I'm more than happy to answer questions today. And we're going to be talking about a lot of general principles for livestock, but I can't, take everything I say as a general principle. I can't make any specific diagnoses or determine any specific treatment protocols with sort of my talk today. All right, so one of the first things that I like to encourage people to think about when they're going to acquire new livestock or add livestock to their herd is, what is that animal going to be for? What's the purpose? And so over on the left, you can see we've got an adorable little baby goat in pajamas. So it is totally fine for their purpose to be a pet and to be a companion animal and to be the most adorable creature in the whole wide world. But also goats and sheep for sure are used for other things. So we've got meat goats. The white and red goat there is a Boer goat. They're from South Africa, and they're traditionally a meat goat breed. So they're raised to be eaten, to be slaughtered and eaten. And then over on the right side of the slide, we've got a dairy goat. The Toggenburg that's pictured there is the oldest breed of dairy goat in the U.S. And you can see, if you look at those two pictures, they're pretty different body types and body conditions. They're both appropriate for their breeds, but they're pretty different. And then down at the bottom, we've got fiber. And so, we can also talk about wool for things like sheep or alpacas or llamas. That happens to be a fiber goat, so an Angora goat. That is raised specifically for their fiber. And so we're going to have, different qualities that we're looking for depending on what the animal's purpose is. I've only got goats up here, but sheep certainly have the same categories. And then cattle as well. We may have some pet cows. We may have dairy cows. We may have beef cows. Those two are going to be very different looking animals. And when we're looking to go rescue them or buy them or acquire them, we're going to be looking for different things. So now we're going to talk about those different things and what to look for. All right, so we've got a couple of sort of points here of, this is geared towards somebody wanting to acquire livestock for the first time, but it definitely also plays into if you've already got some goats or sheep, or you've got some horses and you want to add some livestock to your farm as well. I think these are all really good tips. So the biggest one being do your research, knowing why you want the animal, what you want the animal for, and probably picking a specific breed or at least a specific type of animal and finding out what is, the high quality animals of that breed or that type, what they look like and where to find them. I do not recommend starting by going to a livestock auction because you are at high risk of falling in love with something and then it not being the right choice for your farm. So similar thing, you want to make sure it's suited for your needs. So if you want a cow to milk, that means you're going to want a dairy cow. I wouldn't recommend bringing home a Black Angus cow and then trying to milk her. I don't think that's going to go super well for you. And similarly, I've had clients that have brought home pygmy goats or Nigerian dwarf goats with the intention of milking them. And while yes, that is possible, it is not what they're necessarily intended for. And so it's just not going to give you as much return if that's what you're looking for out of your animal. If you're looking for a pet, then a pygmy goat or a Nigerian dwarf goat is a fantastic creature to have, and they're super adorable. And then this is my PSA in the bottom right here that just to make sure that we all know the animals that are sold at an auction, sold over Facebook Marketplace, or at like a flea market, they are not going to be the cream of the crop, best stock from that producer 9 times out of 10. And so, that's okay as long as you know that, right? So if you're looking to rescue an animal or you're looking for a pet, or just a companion or something like that, then, you can get your animal wherever you want to. You just can't expect a very high quality, let's say high producing or really good breeding prospect animal from one of these sites. And I've had that mistake happen multiple times where we bought it from an auction or a Facebook sale or something like that, and then are hoping to breed it and get milk and do all of that, and it doesn't always go super well. All right, and so then we're looking at the actual animals themselves, wherever you're buying them from or rescuing them from. The things you want to look for, and this goes as well for your animals at home if you've already got them. So you want to look for animals with nice bright eyes, a nice shiny coat, and a good healthy weight. That means not too skinny or too fat. Something that is being sold that is kind of being removed from a herd, higher chance it's going to be too skinny, but an animal that's in your backyard that's eating lots of snacks and treats, there's a chance it might be a little too overweight. So we want to learn about what the healthy weight is and how to do a body condition score. And that's something that your veterinarian can definitely show you. I can go over it as well today, but to know that we keep our animals at a really nice weight, because that's the best way to keep them healthy long term. You don't want them to be lethargic. It's never a good sign when you've got herd animals that are mostly grouped together and then you've got one off by themselves. That's usually a bad sign. Evidence of discharge from their eyes or their nose. The color of the discharge is pretty important in these species. So ruminants, goats and sheep and cattle, they tend to have a lot of clear nasal and sometimes even ocular or eye discharge on kind of a daily basis, and that's okay for them. But if we ever see thicker discharge that is yellow or green or white, that's when I start to get a little bit worried and I want to know what's going on with that animal. So that wouldn't be an animal that I would recommend acquiring, bringing into your home, because you're potentially bringing disease back with it. If at all possible, it's a great idea to ask about the animal's history. So why is it leaving its former home? Is it that that person is a breeder and they breed goat kids or lambs to sell, and that's just what they do? And if that's the case, you want to try to ask about their parents or the herd or the flock that they came from. If it's an adult animal, the history and why it's being sold is even more important, because there's a good chance that it's no longer working for the producer that it's coming from, and there's a reason that it's being sold. Again, if you're buying it to be a pet or something like that, and you don't care if it's able to be bred, then that's great. You can still have potentially a really nice, sweet, healthy pet animal. But if you're purchasing a goat or a sheep, with the intention of breeding and, kind of homesteading and kind of potentially making some money off of that animal, you don't want one that was kicked out of somebody else's herd for not being able to do their job. If they're going to come to your farm and be a working animal, you want to know that they can do the job that you are purchasing them for or acquiring them for. Over on the right here, we've got kind of a list of questions. These are the things that I ask anytime someone has purchased a new animal. And I will tell you, not all of the time they can't always be answered, especially if they come from a livestock market or a flea market or something like that. But it is really good idea to be able to answer all of these questions. And so we've got age, that's pretty self-explanatory. Vaccination history is really important. Vaccines should be ubiquitous, but they are not. There are a lot of producers out there of these livestock animals that never vaccinate. I recommend always vaccinating. And so, if you've just recently acquired something, I'm going to want to vaccinate it if we don't know the history. But if you do know the history and you can say, yes, it was given vaccines on such and such a date, then that's going to save you some money and not have your vet need to vaccinate again. Castration status, so basically with males, knowing if they are intact or castrated, that seems like it would be fairly self-explanatory and fairly self-evident, but there is a condition called cryptorchidism. For those who don't know, cryptorchidism means one or more retained testicles, so the testicle is still up inside the body and not visible. They can be either unilateral or bilateral. A bilateral cryptorchid is going to look like a castrated male, but it's going to be intact. Now, those males sometimes are sterile and sometimes are able to produce offspring. They shouldn't produce offspring because it is a hereditary trait. So especially if you've got a unilateral cryptorchid where you've just got one retained testicle, that animal should not be allowed to breed and it should be castrated. But even bilateral cryptorchids can potentially produce offspring, which would most likely be unwanted offspring because they'd be a surprise. But also there's a massively increased risk of testicular cancer in cryptorchid animals. So we want to remove those testicles for the animal's health as well. So one of those things where if you're purchasing or acquiring an animal from someone who's had that animal since birth, you want to find out if it has been castrated and when it has been castrated. Prior diet, certainly diet change can cause some GI or stomach upset. So we just want to know what they were eating before, if at all possible. And then prior matings or offspring, more important if you're looking to sort of homestead and have a breeding animal, but still important if you are just having a pet to know if that animal's been pregnant before, been bred before, anything like that. And then certainly a show record if that's something you're interested in. And then prior or current diseases. So what has this animal dealt with in the past? And is it still dealing with anything currently? I will tell you, I say this all the time, ruminants are not athletes. They are not meant to be athletes. And so if and when, mostly when, a ruminant gets some type of respiratory disease, they tend to develop a kind of a chronic cough or a chronic respiratory disease secondary to that. And it may be that the animal feels well and is eating and is happy, but they just have this sort of chronic cough. And that can be okay, again, especially if it's a pet situation. But it's really good to know if that animal has dealt with respiratory disease in the past so that you know what you may be dealing with in the future and you know what you're signing up for. All right, and so then the individual animal that you're going to be considering bringing home with you, you want to look at its behavior. Behavior is super important. These animals, pretty much all of them that we're talking about today, are either going to be as big as or bigger than your average human. And so they can certainly do some damage to us if they are not in a comfortable situation or if they're an aggressive animal or anything like that. And so behavior is important for their health. But it's also important when you're going to bring an animal into your farm, you want to know that you can work with that animal and you can be safe around that animal, especially if we're talking about a pet animal where maybe it's going to be around your children or your other animals, or we're talking about, someone who's getting animals that is new to livestock and isn't used to working with cows or isn't used to working with sheep, we really want that person to have some nice, friendly cows or sheep to start with and get used to those animals. And then this isn't necessarily super common, unfortunately, but if at all possible, having a veterinarian look over the animal prior to you purchasing it is a really, really great idea. You know, it's a thing in the horse world. We do pre-purchase exams all the time, and that's part of what helps somebody decide whether or not to buy a horse. You know, that's something you can ask your livestock veterinarian to do for you as well. The other thing, if you can't do that, would be to have the vet look at it shortly after you purchase it to make sure that it is what it's supposed to be, especially if it's a young animal, making sure there's not congenital issues that you've got to worry about as it grows older. And then the other thing you can do with the veterinarian that you've hopefully got a great relationship with is to talk to them about where to potentially get animals. You know, so they may have a client that breeds and sells animals that they know the husbandry is great, or they just may know of some good places to acquire animals. And then, you know, again, just a reminder of kind of there's multiple different places you can get these animals. The buyer beware part is kind of that livestock market, auction market, Facebook sale, flea market, all of that. A really great place to find this type of stuff is going to be breeder associations or shows. In my area, we just had a Florida Dairy Goat Association show, and so we had breeders and producers from all over the state come up to my neck of the woods to show their animals and compete. And so it was a really great place to kind of walk around and see what's available. And, you know, you could potentially talk to those breeders and talk about doing a private sale if you were looking for an animal like that. All right, so we're going to move on a little bit to housing because most of these animals can't live in your house with you. I do know some people with house goats, but they tend to be kind of loud and kind of messy. So most of these guys want to be outside and be somewhere around your farm. Now, one of the things that you know, we want to talk about is housing animals together and what animals we can house together and what animals we can't house together. There are pros and cons of combining all of the different species. So for sheep and goats can definitely be housed together. So sheep with goats and vice versa. And that's a safe, healthy thing for them to do. I will say we handle them a little bit differently because sheep end up being a lot more flighty, whereas goats are pretty easy to train and will oftentimes come up to you. And so sheep tend to need things like chutes and other handling facilities, whereas goats may or may not. So that can sometimes be a little bit strange to have them housed in the same place, but for the majority of the time, they can live together and be okay. Sheep and goats and cattle, we'll get into cattle and camelids here in a minute. Sheep and goats and cattle can live together pretty successfully. They do tend to sort of stick to their herds, and so if you put goats out with cattle, you'll oftentimes see that they sort of segregate themselves a little bit. Another thing that you can do with those guys is rotationally graze them, and so you can have the cattle come through sort of after the sheep and goats to kind of clean up some of their parasites and before you cycle everybody through again. So that's one option. As far as both of those creatures with horses, sheep and goats can definitely live with horses. I've got a lot of clients that keep goats with horses, or a single goat with a herd of horses. They tend to do pretty well. They don't share parasites, so that's great. They tend to be pretty good companions. They like to hang out together. I've had a couple of events of horses stepping on goats, and goats with horns especially injuring horses. It's not common, but it can happen, so just something to be aware of. Cattle and horses, there's a little bit of a danger there. It depends on the personalities of both the cattle and the horses. So that's a little bit of a pro and con type situation that I would say talk to your specific veterinarian who knows your animals and let them give you their thoughts. But as far as parasites, that's not going to be a major issue to keep cattle and horses together. It would be mostly that the fencing is a little bit different as far as the needs and potential injury. Moving on to camelids. So camelids include llamas and alpacas. They do also technically include old world camels, so like actual dromedary and camels. I do not recommend keeping those as pets. We're not going to talk about them today. They're pretty dangerous animals, so we'll just put that out there. But talking about llamas and alpacas, they actually have pretty different requirements than a lot of other animals. And so most llama and alpaca people will tell you to keep them separate from everybody else. So we'll get into our goats and sheep a little bit. We've got a couple of different examples of kind of housing options for these guys. So you can see we've got some goats in barn/stall situations. And I do love for them to be able to go outside. A lot of people will have them in stalls for part of the day and then out into a pasture for another part of the day, sort of like horses. My rule for fencing with goats is that if you have a fence and you take a bucket of water and you throw the bucket of water, at the fence, and some of that water makes it through, then a determined goat will probably make it through that fence as well. They are known escape artists, and so that is something you massively want to consider before you bring any goats home. You want to make sure you've got really good fence. The regular sort of horizontal board fence that you might keep a horse in will absolutely never contain a goat. They also typically need pretty tall fencing, and you don't want to have something that they can climb right near the tall fence because they will just climb right on over and very happily jump out. Having things for them to climb within the pasture, at the center of the pasture, is great though. Goats absolutely love to climb. Things like boulders and everything like that, or even people will get children's play places and stuff and let the goats climb on that, and that goes really well. But putting it next to the fence is a good way to have your goat run off. With sheep, they are less likely to try to go through the fence, not to say that they won't, so you still want to be careful, but they tend to prefer to kind of be out in a pasture type setting. The top sheep pictured there are in more of a dry lot, smaller type area, and then you've also got in the bottom kind of a big large field in certain areas of the country which are not Florida. People keep sheep out on the range where they will actually have them out ranging for sometimes months at a time and just handle them a couple of times a year and kind of round them all up and bring them in. We do not have the space down here in Florida to do that, so I'm less well versed on how to manage a population like that, but that is also an option, especially for sheep, for goats as well. It goes without saying, hopefully, that they always need access to fresh, clean water wherever they live, and having a run-in, if they're just out in pasture, having run-in sheds and shade is really important. As well as having some type of protection from predators. That's going to be a little bit based on your area. You want to have good fencing to try to keep predators out to the best of your ability. The other thing that you can do is guardian donkeys are a thing in my neck of the woods, at least. So donkeys can be really good livestock protectors, as well as just livestock protection dogs. I won't go into more detail about either of those, but you do want to make sure that those animals have been generally raised with the species that they're hopefully going to protect, so that they're really comfortable with them and they're willing to protect them. So on to our alpacas and llamas. Like I kind of touched on before, it's not recommended to keep them together with goats, sheep, or cattle, or horses. With goats and sheep and cows, their nutrition requirements are pretty different, and so you would need to be really careful about keeping them fed separately. So that's why it's just generally better to have them in separate areas. With alpacas and llamas and horses, they do have somewhat different nutrition requirements. Health-wise, they have a little bit more leeway as far as staying together. But most of the camelid people that I know will say that a horse will injure an alpaca or a llama very easily and not necessarily intentionally. A horse may just be trying to play like it would play with its horse friends, and end up really, really hurting an alpaca or a llama. So that's why they don't like to keep them all together. As far as pasture size, that's going to really, really depend. For alpacas, generally 5 to 10 per acre is pretty good. But if you've got not so good pasture or even better pasture, then that may change. And that's also going to change based on if you are utilizing the grass as their main forage or if you're offering them hay or some other type of roughage in addition to the grass. If you are going to breed these animals, then you need to have very separate areas for them to keep them separated. And so we've got, females, weanlings, young males, and then adult males. And so these guys are a little bit different in that regard than some of the other species where you may need fewer pastures. So that's just something to keep in mind depending on what your plans are. If you're going to take any alpacas or llamas home, I would probably stick with just, same-sex groups so that you don't have to worry about the complicated four pastures. And then for cattle, that's going to very much vary depending on what you want to use the cattle for. We've got some different examples here. In the upper left, we've got a pretty traditional working dairy. And so you can see these cows at the moment are on kind of concrete floor. You can kind of glimpse behind the cow on the far right that there's some sand bed packed in there. And then they're eating a total mixed ration that's sort of fed to them through the bars. I don't suspect anybody watching this has a full working dairy, so that's probably not how you're going to keep your cattle. And then on the right, we've got cattle in more of a feedlot setting. That's a pretty intensive management setting. They're kept in quite small spaces and they are fed, a lot of high calorie grain and food to, typically it's with the intention to keep them there for a temporary period of time and then send them to slaughter. So those are kind of the two ways we think of keeping cattle traditionally. But more and more cattle are becoming pets and are coming to live in our backyards. And so, we can definitely just have cows out in a field somewhere. These cows in the bottom here are Jersey cattle. They are probably dairy cows that are just turned out, but the example being that you can just have your cows out in your backyard. Fencing is also very important. You want to make sure that it's fencing that's going to contain them. That is a little bit weaker fencing than for goats. A lot of people will use one or more strands of hot wire on cattle fencing just to sort of teach them where they need to stay within, because they can break down most fencing, but if you put even just a single strand of hot wire up at the top, that can be really helpful to sort of remind them they need to stay. For keeping cattle, the space is going to vary really, really widely based on what type of pasture you have and what type of cows you have, how big they are, all of that. There are some calculators online. If you just search like stocking density calculator or pasture area calculator or something like that, there's a bunch of them out there and they will ask you some really good questions about how much rain you get per year, what type of pasture you have, and everything like that to help you determine how many cattle you can fit on your pastures. Your local extension agent is a really good resource. I think pretty much everywhere in the country, potentially associated with a vet school, but even not, there are some agricultural and livestock extension agents. And so they are a really, really great resource to know what works best in your area. In our area, our extension agents will do soil testing for a pretty cheap price. And so that's a great way to find out if we've got mineral deficiencies or anything else that we've got to worry about on a specific area of land. And they will also help you with just what is best in that hyper local area. So that's where I always recommend going when thinking about, bringing livestock onto your farm. They can also help you with the legalities of it, make sure that you're zoned to actually have the type of livestock that you want to have. And just the best way to go about it. They've probably got a lot of resources and maybe even some veterinarian recommendations for you. All right, so our little interlude into breeding here, I've mentioned it a fair few times because a lot of people who bring home goats, sheep, and cattle want baby goats, sheep, and cattle because look at them. They are absolutely adorable. It's kidding season right now, and so I absolutely love goat kids. They are my absolute favorite. Um, and so they want to breed them, and they want to make more. They want to have their own babies. It is not as simple as it may seem. Certainly, putting a male and a female animal together is relatively simple, and you'll probably get a pregnancy out of it if you do it enough times. But the actual pregnant part of it for the female, as well as the birth, as well as raising the young, is not super straightforward, and it's really important that you've got a good veterinarian that can help walk you through that. So my recommendation for people that are new to livestock of any type is to keep your chosen species for a full year. So you can keep them through every season of the year. You can keep them through your birthday weekend when you want to go out of town and you didn't really think about the fact that they still have to get fed twice a day. You can keep them, through all the different events throughout the year, holidays, all of that, before you decide and before you allow any of them to actually mate and breed and create more livestock on your farm. So that is always my recommendation. And during that year, you can work on finding and establishing care with a livestock veterinarian who can help you out and help you plan for your breeding. There are a lot of factors that we consider when we think about breeding these animals, as far as who are good breeding candidates and who are not. And one of my big PSAs here is this bolded question. Do you have a plan for dystocia? For those of you who don't know, a dystocia just means a difficult birth, but it can range from just a 5-minute, tweak to get the baby out, or it can range all the way up to those babies are not coming out without a surgical C-section, and they may not come out alive. And so obviously when we get higher up in the range, you absolutely require veterinarian involvement. And so it's really, really important if you've got these animals, and especially if you've got pregnant versions of these animals where you're going to be having babies, you need to have a plan prior to the night that your goat starts going into labor about what veterinarian can see you and are they on call 24/7? I hope a single person isn't on call 24/7. So is there a group of veterinarians? Do they have a call group? What are their resources for you if your goat decides to kid midnight on Christmas Eve, because that happens? And can they come to you always without fail, or do you maybe have to haul to them? That is very common more and more in this day and age of a massive shortage of veterinarians and being incredibly overworked. We ask people to haul into us a lot because that's the only way we can actually see the animal. So you need to have a plan for getting your animal in a vehicle. Luckily with goats and sheep, you can mostly put them in a car. I've seen goats in minivans. I've seen them in Honda Civics. Like they can come in anything, and get them to the vet. Cattle, it's a little bit of a harder story. And same thing with alpacas and llamas. I don't think most of them fit in a car, but you need to have a plan and know what to do. All of the baby animals on this slide were dystocias that I managed. Obviously, they're all happy and healthy, so they were all successful outcome dystocias. The very wet goat kid that's on the right was from Wednesday, so just a couple of days ago. So she's just a couple of days old now. But her owner did fantastically and called me after her goat had been in labor for only 10 minutes. So very, very short period of time, but she could tell that the goat was stuck, that the baby kid was stuck and wasn't going to progress further. And so she called me. Everybody was lucky. I was 15 minutes away. And so I got there and I had this little girl and her brother out within about 20 minutes, and they were standing and nursing before I left. So that's how we want them to go. I will tell you guys that many, many, many of my dystocia calls happen in the middle of the night after the animal has been in labor for close to 24 hours, and they do not end well for definitely not the baby, and oftentimes not the mother either. And it's often apparently a surprise that things can go that way. Goats and sheep, just really briefly, goats and sheep shouldn't have more than 30 minutes between each kid, or 30 minutes after they initially start active labor before having their first kid. Um, Alpacas and llamas tend to give birth in the middle of the night. That's just what they prefer to do, but they also tend to be quite quick. And then cattle can go for a little bit longer, but they can have some really severe dystocias where there are certain positions that a calf can get stuck in that no amount of pulling is gonna actually remove it. And basically, our options with cattle at that point become something called a fetotomy, which is when the calf is already passed, and basically involves removing the passed calf, or a C-section. Both of those require a veterinarian. So anyway, I'll step off my soapbox here in just a moment, but if you're going to breed animals, you absolutely need to have a veterinarian that you can work with and help you with a plan, because dystocias can end in these absolutely beautiful little kids and lambs, but oftentimes they don't end as happily. All right, so over to handling facilities. So if you're going to have a veterinarian come to your property, then we have to handle your animals. And I have been told so many times that Bessie the cow is so sweet and so nice and will just come up to you and take treats from you and let you pet her, and she's the best cow ever. So they don't need a handling facility because Bessie is really nice. But Bessie doesn't know me. And so I get to the property and I smell different and I have a stethoscope on, and I maybe have a needle with a vaccine that I need to administer to her. And Bessie is at the other side of the 5-acre paddock, and there is no catching her, and there's nothing we can do. And so handling facilities for livestock animals are absolutely required, in my opinion, for me to come work with them for sure, but also for you to work with them as a producer. You're going to be doing a lot of handling yourself, hopefully, and things like milking if you've got dairy animals, hoof trims for your goats and your sheep, maybe shearing for your alpacas and your llamas. So you need to be able to safely handle these animals. We've got a couple of examples here. So the biggest picture of the cow with the white face is in kind of a traditional squeeze chute. This one is really nice because you can see we've got a head catch at the front. We've got a bottom panel that you can open that is shown in the picture where you can work on their feet. And then you've got some side panels up top that you can reach through to give vaccines and injections and draw blood and all kinds of stuff like that. And then at the very back, looks like it's an open palpation gate. There's a palpation gate back there that a veterinarian can get behind the animal safely without the animal being able to back up and squish them, to do things like palpating and breeding and managing a dystocia and all of that. So these are really fantastic. Most of them are portable. And you don't necessarily have to own one if you have a friend with one, you know what I mean? So we have groups of farmers where one guy owns the squeeze chute and all of them went on together. And when it's time to work the various herds, we just move the squeeze chute around to the different properties. So it's not necessarily that you have to invest in this one by yourself, but if you've got cattle, full-size cattle, you've got to have something like this. If you only have one or two cows, especially if they're not sort of full-size animals, or if they're a little bit nicer and friendlier, a little bit more like pet animals, the lower right picture may be something that'll work for your operation. That is just a head catch sort of by itself. So you can see that it looks like it's bolted to that sort of alleyway of fence. And that fence isn't going to keep that animal from going side to side a little bit, but the head catch is going to keep that animal from backing up, so someone can get behind that animal and can work on it a little bit without it backing up and without getting gored by those giant horns that are on that particular cow. Again, a cow can be the nicest one in the world, but if it's got big horns and it swings its head, it can massively hurt you without meaning to. And then the sort of middle top picture, we've got an example of an alleyway for sheep. With sheep, we don't typically catch their heads because they would never run through the head catch if we did that. And so what we do with them is we've got this really nice alleyway. It's actually belongs to my boss, and so it was pretty economical for her to put in at her property. but you run the sheep into the alleyway and you just close the back of it, and basically you lean over the sides of that green sort of alleyway there, and you can just work on them from above them. And it's the fact that you've got 6 or 7 or 8 sheep kind of head to tail in there, that you're able to work on them. It sort of acts like a squeeze chute, but using the other sheep. So that's a really nice option for sheep, because I have had sheep run through fences so many times because they absolutely do not want to be touched by people. So with a system like this, and with one of the squeeze chutes for the cows, you'll use almost like a funnel system where it gets from wide to narrow to actually sort of funnel them in. And then goats are my favorite because they're the best. Goats are very trainable. And so we've got in the upper right an example of a milking stanchion for a goat. You can train these guys to come up here. You can see there's some food in the little bin there. And so most goats, once they know the drill, they will pop right on up there, put their head through the little bar, and then you can just sort of tighten the bar. It does the same thing as the head catch. It prevents them from backing up. But 9 times out of 10, if they've been trained to the milking stanchion, they'll stand there on their own and they'll just munch on their food while you do whatever you've got to do with them. You can milk them, you can trim their feet, you can give them vaccines, all kinds of stuff like that. So these are just some examples, but if you are considering bringing livestock into your life, you have also got to bring some handling facilities into your life. All right, so for our special friends, the camelids, so alpacas and llamas, they don't tend to need handling facilities quite the same as the others. As long as they are halter trained, we can usually bring them just into a smaller confined space like a stall. But using a halter on them, one of the big things that I always like to make sure that people know is that camelids are what's known as obligate nasal breathers. That means they cannot breathe through their mouths at all. So if you cover their nose, you're suffocating them. They can't breathe through their mouths. Even if their mouths open up, they can't. There's no air passes. And so they've also got the sort of a bony prominence on their face, but then at the very end of their nose, where their nostrils are, there's no bony prominence anymore. It's just all squishy nasal passages. And so if the halter is not fit appropriately, then you can actually suffocate them and squish their nasal passages with the noseband of the halter if it's too low on their face and you're applying pressure there. And so that's something anyone who's going to work with alpacas or llamas really needs to be aware of, as well as just if you are handling them, you've got your hands kind of on their face. If you're occluding their nostrils, they're not able to breathe. You can also, if you put too much pressure, you can also break that bony prominence on their face. So you do want to be really gentle with these guys' heads and faces, because they've got a relatively delicate bone structure. And if you do break that bony prominence, it's going to go right into their nasal passage, which they absolutely need to breathe. So just a sort of a danger warning there about handling these guys. The other fun thing about them is that they have very protruding eyes compared from their head compared to a lot of other species. And so one of the recommendations is to not have hanging hay nets or hay baskets or anything like that in a stall or a confined space that they're going to be in, because it's just going to massively increase their risk of eye injury and just getting debris and things like that in their eye. And I will just take a second as well to say that a reminder for you guys that eye issues in animals are always an emergency. So my typical recommendation for any species that has an eye issue is to, if you notice that they're squinting, they've got discharge, there's something in it, it looks painful, any of the above, give your veterinarian a call. Also take a picture of the eye and ask your veterinarian what the best way to send that picture to them would be. And we certainly can not typically diagnose it off the picture, know exactly what it is, but it'll help us know if we have to drop everything and get to your place immediately, or if we can see it later that afternoon, or if we can maybe occasionally see it the next morning, depending on what is going on. But eye issues need to be dealt with quickly because they will turn bad very, very fast. So the other thing with camelids is that they're actually more used to the cold than you would think looking at them. It doesn't look like they've got a whole lot of insulation most of the time with their big noodle necks, but they're from South America originally, and so they're actually somewhat used to the cold. What they are not as well used to is the heat, and so you do want to be really careful with heat stress in these guys. Make sure they've always got access to shade and to water. If they're in a barn and it's summertime or it's warm in Florida all year, then we want to make sure we've got fans on them and giving them the option to really stay cool. Shearing is really important. Typically, it's going to be either once or twice a year. I wouldn't necessarily recommend shearing them yourself if you've never done it before. I know I am not a shearer by any stretch of the imagination. It is a skill for sure. And there's certain shearers, there's a lot of shearers that basically travel the country and they do kind of a circuit around the whole country. And so if you are acquiring these animals, then I would recommend reaching out to somebody that you know that also has them in your area, or a breed association or something like that, and get a contact of a shearer so you can get on their schedule. And typically they kind of set the schedule and the rest of us have to work around it. But really important to do. A alpaca or llama that is left without being sheared for a long period of time quickly turns into a really severe health situation. All right, so we're going to go a little bit more into kind of some basic care and some somewhat specific things for some of the different species. This is definitely going to bias a little bit more towards goats and sheep, but I'm more than happy to answer questions at the end about other species or about any other sort of specifics that we talk about. So talking about feeding, so nutrition. So we've got two categories of animals that are going to be on our farm. We've got breeding animals and we've got non-breeding animals. So breeding animals they're gonna require more calories and more nutrition. And so we want always, for all of these species, the bulk of the diet should be roughage. Roughage is grass or hay, or depending on your area of the country, sometimes things like silage or haylage. That is the absolute bulk of the diet, the vast majority of what they eat. And then in breeding animals, or sometimes show animals, animals that need to perform in some way or another, we are going to balance and supplement that roughage diet with a concentrate. And then we also want to give mineral to everybody, and we'll talk about that in a second. And so I've got an example of the ruminant digestive tract here. So goats, sheep, and cattle are all ruminants. And you may have heard that cows have 4 stomachs. It's not totally true, at least not probably the way you're thinking about spelling it. They don't have 4 stomachs, as in the number 4, but they do have 3 chambers that come before their true stomach. So 4 as in before. So they have got, they're sort of shown here, they're going to swallow some food down the esophagus. It's going to go into their rumen, which is where they get the name ruminants. And that is basically a ginormous fermentation vat. It's just a big vessel that contains millions and millions of microbes. So we've got bacteria, we've got fungi, we've got protozoa, we've got all kinds of things that are breaking down that food. And then there's a sort of a front section of the forestomach that is called the reticulum. And the food tends to kind of go between the rumen and the reticulum and kind of squeeze back and forth. Then we go over into the omasum, that's the third section there. And that one's going to kind of further break things down, but mostly it's going to pull some water out because in the rumen there's a ton of fluid and a ton of water. And then finally, after a while, we go into the abomasum. The abomasum is the true stomach. So it's the stomach that's just like your stomach and my stomach, where there's stomach acid and there's breakdown and all of that. So that's the true stomach. Everything else just came before it. So hence where we sort of got the thing of 4 stomachs. So the reason why this is so important is because the microbes in the rumen are their own population of critters, and we have to take care of them. We can't feed the ruminant without feeding the rumen. And so they want roughage. They want hay and grass and other products like that. That's what actually allows ruminants to get energy from hay and grass. As mammals, any mammals cannot digest hay or grass. They all need help. The ones that eat it all need help from microbes. And so that has to be the vast majority of the diet to keep those microbes happy and to keep them releasing energy to the animal itself. If we feed them too much concentrate, what we're going to do is the natural order of things is that there's sort of a small population of the microbes that work on the concentrates, and some of the microbes, take small amounts of the concentrates, but they really want the roughage, the hay. If we feed them too much concentrate, we are going to massively unbalance their rumen, and we're going to cause things like ruminitis or acidosis, some really gnarly diseases, things like bloat that you may have heard of, that are truly life-threatening diseases. So it's all about keeping those little bugs in there happy. And so we can use concentrate, not saying we can't, but we have to have a reason for it. And so that's something to talk to the veterinarian that you've got a good relationship with about, as far as which of your animals should maybe be on a concentrate and which of them shouldn't. I can tell you which of your animals should not be on a concentrate, and that is castrated males. So in goats, they are called wethers. This wether's name is Kyle, and he is adorable. He's one of my patients. And so he is castrated. So again, that means he cannot breed. He doesn't have testicles. He is not allowed to have any grain. They should not be fed any grain. The one exception to this occasionally is with sort of market show wethers when they're quite young and they're going to shows. But the word that should hang in your mind there is market. That's because those animals are not going to live long. They're going to be eaten. So we feed them grain in order for them to be eaten later. For a pet animal that you're going to have for many years and love for a long time, they should not be fed grain. And I know food is love, and we want to love them, and we want to give them all the things that they want in the world. And they will tell you that they need grain very badly, but they do not. And the reason for that, I won't go into this in too much detail, but the reason for that is that castrated male ruminants are at really high risk of urethral blockage, so urinary tract obstruction with stones. And basically the way that they form those stones is through inappropriate diet, which is typically going to be from grain. As you can see, I've got my sticker on there that I purchased from another veterinarian who's also very passionate about this, that says, "Stop feeding boy goats grain. They do not need it, and you're going to create an emergency, life-threatening situation if you do." So big PSA there. For other non-breeding animals, so even your female animals that aren't breeding, a lot of times they don't need to concentrate either. Goats especially are made to live on mountains and eat food that is not very nutrient dense, and so they can get fat on air pretty easily. And so we don't want to help them out with putting too much weight on. All right. All stock food. It has a horse and a cow and a goat and a sheep on the bag. And so that means that I can just buy that one bag at the feed store and I'll be good for all my critters, right? Wrong. All stock is good for no stock. All stock food is not a good plan. I don't think it should exist on the market. It does not help anybody out. I think like the horse directions on these bags say that horses have to eat like 24 pounds of it to get their nutrition, which is insane. Sheep especially have vastly different mineral requirements to all other species. Specifically, they are incredibly sensitive to copper. And so feeding a food that is supposedly appropriate for both horses and cattle to a sheep is going to kill them with an overdose of copper. So all stock foods are good for no stock. Heavily recommend against that. If you are going to feed a concentrate, which again, sometimes we need to, I want you to feed a species specific food. So a goat food or a sheep food or a cattle food or a horse food. We're not talking about horses today, or a horse food. probably most of your pet cattle and sheep and goats don't necessarily need that concentrate, but what they do need is mineral. They tend to do best with loose mineral as opposed to like a mineral block or like a salt lick like a horse would take. And so I do still recommend getting species specific ones. Purina makes a good one that's for both goats and sheep, and so you can certainly do that if you've got the two species together. If you're at all questioning it between those two species, I would go with the sheep specific one because the sheep are the one that are potentially going to die from overdoses, whereas the goats can probably make up for deficiency somewhere else if they've got a little bit of a deficiency. And then with cattle food, that should be separate. If it's just a pet cow, again, it probably doesn't need grain, and so you can just do kind of a loose trace mineral, and they tend to be okay. For camelids, they do also make specific like alpaca and llama foods, and those guys also have very different nutrition requirements, and so species specific foods are the way to go. It seems like you might be spending more money, but you are actually saving money on vet bills and on loss of those animals in the future. All right, we are chugging along here. I'm almost done, I promise. Hopefully I'm not too wordy for you guys. So another big sort of topic when we're thinking about keeping these animals in a variety of different situations is going to be biosecurity. That sounds like a big scary word, and I admit I'm biased towards talking about it because I do have a public health degree, so I think about the human safety as well as the animal safety. But biosecurity is basically just about keeping the animals that are in your property, on your property, healthy and happy and safe. And part of how we do that is by limiting their exposure to germs. And there are a variety of ways that germs can come in, other animals for sure, but also on you and on your boots and on other products that you use, potentially on your vehicles. They can come in with other animals, so your pet dog and cat or whatever. They can come in, and they can come in on your visitors, your friends. So you've got this great little herd of cattle that you bought, and you're gonna raise them up, and they're gonna be your animals, and so you want to show to all your friends. Well, your friends come over and visit them and pet them and love on them, except maybe your friend was just at a petting zoo earlier that day, and they saw some other cows earlier that day, or they saw some goats or some sheep. And maybe they weren't showing symptoms, but maybe those goats or sheep or cows had a respiratory bug or had a GI bug, and your friend came from one place to the other. They didn't change their shoes, they didn't change their shirt. Hopefully they washed their hands, but you don't always know. And they're potentially bringing those germs into your herd and onto your animals, and they could get sick days or weeks later, and you may never know sort of how that happened. And so that's why always practicing good biosecurity is really important when we've got these animals. So keeping facilities really clean, and just good hygiene. So, washing your hands obviously between animals. If you do go to a show or something like that with some of your animals, it is best practice to quarantine them when you come back to your farm and keep them away from the rest of your herd. Or if you bring a new animal in, definitely best practice to quarantine them. Typically 3 weeks is our starting point for a apparently healthy animal. We want to keep them separate from everybody else for 3 weeks. If they're looking good at that point, then we can go ahead and chance it. But depending on what bug you're worried about, you may need to quarantine for longer, or do things like screening tests where you do things like cultures and other testing to make sure that those animals are truly negative. I didn't have time to get into some of the infectious diseases of goats and sheep and other species today, but there are kind of a variety of chronic and contagious infectious diseases. And so that is something that you should talk about with your veterinarian before you bring an animal onto your property, especially if you have other animals already. And just make sure that you're not bringing something on that isn't going to go away. Vaccinate is the other big thing. So developing a vaccine protocol is going to be a little bit individual to your herd or your group. But even if your animals just hang out on your property and don't leave, I do really recommend still doing some core vaccines, because that is the best way that we know, as medical professionals, the best way that we know to prevent against contagious diseases is to vaccinate. And then working on that plan to kind of tailor to you. So this is the sign in the bottom here is an example of, a sign that you might see up at like a dairy or another facility that just reminds people not to bring in other animals, to have clean boots, to clean their vehicles and all of that. So it's going to depend on your setting, what works best for you. Okay, one really specific thing that if you know me, you know that I can't talk about goats without talking about parasites. I don't know if this is going to be as big of a deal in your neck of the woods as it is in mine, but in the Southeast United States, parasites absolutely kill goats and sheep, but we have more goats here. They are major killers. They kill them often, they kill them quickly, and they kill many of them. So we always have to talk about parasites. So the parasites that we worry about in these guys are typically going to be types of stomach worms. So they're going to actually live in that abomasum, that true stomach that we talked about earlier. There's kind of 4 different groups of the parasites, but they sort of do the same things, and they're sort of hard to tell apart. So we group them together as the HAHS complex. The major one in goats is called Homunculus contortus, is the scientific, $12 name. The common name is the barber pole worm. And in the top right here, that's a specimen of a barber pole worm, and you can see why it got its name. It's got those red and white stripes going all the way down, like a sort of old-timey barber pole. And that is actually the GI tract and the reproductive tract of the worm kind of wrap around each other. And then the sort of gross picture in the bottom of the slide is a bunch of those barber pole worms in a stomach of a goat. That's a necropsy picture, but so you can see they're super tiny, and they will have thousands upon thousands of them. And so stop me if I'm going too long, because I love talking about parasites, but my short spiel hopefully will be that the big thing with these guys is they all have parasites. We're never going to get rid of them completely, and that is not our goal. We don't want them to go to 0 of their parasites, because that's just never going to happen. What we want them to do is to minimize their parasite load to the point that they can handle it. And so why that's so important is that these worms of the HAHS complex are incredibly smart and resourceful, and they're really good at developing resistance to dewormers. So that means that every time we deworm our animals, so give them a dewormer that you may purchase from the store, you may get from your veterinarian, every time that we deworm the animal, we are exposing 100% of the parasites in the body to that dewormer. But probably only, if we're lucky, 70 to 80% of the parasites are actually going to die from that dewormer. So 20 to 30% are not going to die. They're just going to file their little notes away for later for their battle plan of how to fight those dewormers the next time. And they're going to develop resistance. This is, again, at least in my area, this is a massive problem. We've got farms where we've got multiple specific dewormer products that don't work. It's just like giving a goat water. It does absolutely nothing. And the scary part is that there are no new dewormers being developed. Nothing down the pipe. So what we have currently on the market is all we have for the foreseeable future. So if we develop further resistance to those products, we are going to go back to the Stone Ages when we didn't have these dewormers, and we're just going to lose animals left and right. So why do I say all of that? Because one strategy that some people think is the right answer and is not, is to just deworm all the time, because then you're just going to kill all the parasites, right? Except you're not. You're going to cause resistance of those parasites, and we're just going to make the problem worse by doing that. And so what we want to look at is resilience of the animal. And so what that is how well they handle their parasite load. And the way that we do that in goats and sheep as well as in camelids is by doing something called a FAMACHA score, which is what is shown on the screen here. And this is a validated system of looking at a very specific part. It's where that blue arrow is pointing. It is the inner aspect of the lower eyelid, and looking at the color of that and comparing it kind of to the color of this card here, this chart, looking at the color of that and giving that animal a score. It's an anemia score. Anemia means not enough blood. So you may be able to guess that the ones and the twos are good scores. We like having nice, bright red, bright pink mucous membranes that have lots of blood in them. Getting down to the 4s and 5s, those are bad scores. Also, the skull and crossbones on the 5 may or may not have clued you in to the fact that that's a bad score. So doing FAMACHA scores is something that's really, really important to help us guide our deworming protocols. And again, this is going to be something to work out with your specific veterinarian, because there is no one size fits all when it comes to deworming any of our livestock species, to be honest with you. So it's something that you need to work out for your specific herd. What I typically recommend is doing a reduction test on the product that you'd like to use to find out how effective that product actually is, and then using that product until it's no longer effective. What we don't want to do is switch dewormers. Never, ever, ever just rotate through dewormers, because you're just going to create a bigger problem for yourself. And we don't want to deworm without a purpose. We want to have a reason for it. So if you tell me you dewormed your animal last week, I'm going to ask you why. And if you tell me that its FAMACHA score was a 4, I'll say, great, good job. That's the right protocol. If you tell me that you Tractor Supply had a sale of dewormers and you figured you'd stock up and go ahead and deworm your animals, that's not the right answer. That's not what we want to do. So minimizing our deworming is really, really important. And then the other thing is going to be knowing that parasite resilience, so how these animals handle their parasite loads, actually is quite hereditary, and can be passed down. And so if we've got one animal in our herd that we constantly have scores of 3s and 4s and 5, and we need to deworm all the time, it may be time for that animal to leave the herd in one way or another. And that's circling back to, at the beginning when we talked about why somebody might be selling an adult animal. This might be it. And if that's the case, I don't know if you want to bring an animal that really doesn't handle parasites well, probably has been dewormed a lot, and probably has a population of resistant parasites living inside of them. I don't know if you want to bring that onto your pasture and deposit all of those resistant parasites onto your pasture. You may be setting yourself up for some trouble down the road. So this is a really, really, really important topic. If you see a goat or a sheep specifically that is lethargic, is skinny, and has something, I don't have a picture of it, but has something called bottle jaw, which is basically like a double chin, almost like a drooping, fluid-filled sort of sac at the bottom of their chin and their throat latch area. They're probably parasites until proven otherwise. And unfortunately, these guys are prey animals, and so they do a really good job of outwardly hiding that they're sick until they're too sick to do that. And so if they're presenting, quite lethargic and quite symptomatic, then they may need heroics to save that individual animal, and that may not be possible, unfortunately. So the best thing we can do is manage them appropriately and prevent those big parasite issues. So with the FAMACHA score, I will go here, and we've got a video of it. So it's got 4 steps to it. The first step is going to be covering the eye with the upper eyelid. Then we're actually going to push the eyeball back into the skull. You're not going to hurt them, I promise. Then you're going to pull out that lower eyelid, and that mucous membrane should pop back into view. And that goat has had it done before, so you can see that she's relatively amenable to it. Certainly the first time you do it, they might question your motives a little bit, but then they kind of get used to it. And if at all possible, if you've got a FAMACHA card, which you do have to get, you have to go through a training to to get a FAMACHA card. If you do have one of those, then having it up against their sort of face is really helpful. If you don't, then what I tend to say is just know what's normal for that animal. And if it gets more pale, then call me. And if it's staying nice and pink and red, then that's good. For goats, I typically recommend doing the FAMACHA score every 2 weeks if you can. That's a really good timing to kind of track changes. For sheep, we're probably going to put our hands on them a little bit less, and so I just tell people every time they handle the sheep, same thing with alpacas and llamas, every time that they handle them, they should be doing a FAMACHA score. All right, so we talked a little bit about vaccines with biosecurity. The recommendations on the left here are kind of my general recommendations for goats and sheep. So the core vaccine for them is considered the CDT vaccine. That's a clostridial vaccine, 2 different types of basically GI Clostridium, C and D, and then tetanus. Goats and sheep are very, very sensitive to tetanus. So this is a vaccine that all of them should have. It is typically once a year. And then if you are breeding animals, then your pregnant animals should be vaccinated in the last couple of weeks, sort of 3 to 4 weeks before they're due to kid, because that's going to give their colostrum the best immunity for those kids. And then the kids or the lambs are going to be vaccinated kind of multiple times and boosted while they're young, and then they'll move on to an annual schedule. With cattle, it's going to be quite dependent on what your situation is, what vaccines are appropriate for your animals. So that's definitely something to kind of talk to your veterinarian about. And then for camelids, it's sort of similar to goats, where CDT is kind of our core vaccine. For all of these species, we can do a rabies vaccine. They're mammals, so they can be exposed to rabies and they can become symptomatic for rabies. It sort of depends on your area how much exposure they have, but it is not wrong to vaccinate all of these animals for rabies vaccines. The pictures here are showing some injection site areas. Now, these rules are kind of established by an organization called Beef Quality Assurance, and so they were first established for cattle, but we extrapolate them to goats and sheep. And it has to do with the fact that legally these animals are considered food animals in the United States, meaning that they could be raised and slaughtered to be eaten. And so we need to follow these rules even if you're never planning on eating that animal, because there unfortunately isn't a guarantee. They could escape from your property and get on somebody else's property. You could sell them and not realize that the person you're selling them to plans to slaughter them. So there's a lot of really, really important drug rules that I didn't get into the weeds on this talk, but that keep our food supply safe, basically. And one of the sort of basic things is that we always want to give injections of any type of these animals in the neck region, ideally, especially in cattle. And so you can see there's sort of 2 different types of injections listed there. There's intramuscular and subcutaneous. Intramuscular has a pretty small window because that's a muscle that we don't tend to eat. And then subcutaneous has a slightly bigger window, and subcutaneous just means under the skin, so it's not going to go into the muscle. For goats and sheep, we've got some similar areas. The green area on the goat's neck there is going to be a site where we can do intramuscular injections as well. And then the pink and blue areas are sites where we can do subcutaneous injections. For me personally, I really like that pink area. It's the axillary region or the armpit region. I tend to give vaccines there, and if I have to give another medication under the skin, that tends to be a pretty good spot to give it. One thing that you should probably know if you're ever going to give an injection to a goat is they tend to scream every time. So don't think that you're killing them or anything like that. Goats just scream when you give them injections. So fun fact. All right, we're going to talk about feet, and we are almost done. So goats and sheep very much need their feet done. Typically, I recommend 2 to 4 times a year, depending on your area and what your animals are doing. This is a really, really short clip, but this is just sort of showing the basics of how you would do a trim. So you can hopefully see that there's 2 claws on the foot, and they are sort of almost teardrop shaped. They kind of come to a point out of the toes there. And what we want is for there to be a nice flat surface all the way down. And so hopefully you can see in the video that this goat has some overgrown hoof wall on the side. And as I trim it away, you can see that sort of white, fresh new hoof wall underneath. This is the beginning of the trim, not the end. So I'm going to take more of that off, and then I'll take some of the toe off as well. It is always easier to maintain their feet than try to fix a problem if you let them get too overgrown. So my recommendation would be to have somebody that knows what they're doing with feet show you how to do trims if you acquire these animals, and then you practice with them. Start closer to the 4 times a year mark so that she'll probably be a little bit hesitant and not take a lot off every time so that you can stay on top of it. In the video, I'm using a different trimmer than I have listed here because I have recently acquired these trimmers on the left, and I put the product name on there because they're just that good. I really, really recommend these hoof trimmers for goats and sheep. They are significantly easier than the orange trimmers that I'm using in the video. So just a little PSA if you find yourself in need of goat hoof trimmers. For cattle, that's typically going to be a professional job. There's cattle feet people that kind of do the same thing, and they travel around. If cattle are given enough space to walk around and move, they don't typically have a lot of feet issues. At least beef cattle don't. Dairy cattle sometimes have worse feet. So that's going to be a little bit of a case-by-case basis. And then camelids are oftentimes done by the shearers as well. When they're shearing them, they'll also do their feet, but that's definitely something to ask about. There we go. And then finally, very end, I just wanted to touch on senior animals. I know, why I'm here today is for Humane Society. And so, we certainly are going to be probably dealing with some rescue animals, some animals that have had a former life and are now, living out their days, with you. And so senior animals is definitely something that we want to take some extra TLC with and really think about how we manage them. I might sound like a broken record, but this is another area where getting your veterinarian involved and making a plan for these animals is really, really helpful. There are a couple of different medications that are sort of long-term pain medications that work fantastically well in these animals that I've seen good improvements with. Nothing is going to reverse things like arthritis and chronic disease. We can't go back in time, but we can make these animals a lot more comfortable. And then monitoring all the same things that we've been talking about. So monitoring their weight, how shiny their coat is, what their appetite is like. If you've had them for a long time, hopefully you know something about their personality, so what their personality is like. So all of these things are important to monitor as your animals get older and get kind of into their golden years. The sheep shown in this slide is knee walking, and so what it most likely has one of two things. It either has a foot issue, so it may not be an old age thing. It may just be a foot issue. I stole this image off the internet, but it probably has some type of arthritis in the neck or in the front feet, or front legs rather. And so it has a hard time bending down to eat. And so what they'll do to compensate for that is they'll just walk on their knees. And so if you see your animals doing this regularly, that's definitely a reason to have them examined by a vet and figure out what their quality of life is like. If you see your animal is laying down more often than you're used to, and then again, that's another reason to have a vet exam and just to talk to your vet about kind of quality of life and what to be looking for. This cow on the left here is underweight. That's a pretty skinny cow, and you'll sometimes see that as they get older, they just can't digest their food quite as well. You may also see that though if they've got some chronic contagious diseases. I'll just very briefly mention the disease that this animal has is called Johne's disease. And all of the animals we spoke about today can become infected with Johne's disease and can transmit it to each other. It is a chronic, contagious, lifelong disease, unfortunately. And what happens is they become infected when they're young, but they don't actually show signs until they're a lot older. So it's sort of a hidden bug that kind of lives in them for a long time. And unfortunately, we can't cure it. We really can't treat it. We can just try to manage it to the best of our ability. But oftentimes, euthanasia ends up being the appropriate choice for these guys. So, anytime we talk about senior animals, we definitely want to talk about euthanasia. And euthanasia, for those of you who don't know, means a good death or a humane death. And there's a variety of ways to do that, most of them done by a veterinarian. It is different than slaughter in its definition. However, an animal can be slaughtered at the end of its life as well, for food. There are some rules, and it depends on if they've been given medications and everything like that. So there's some specific rules to follow there, but both of those are potentially options. What is hopefully not an option is just sort of allowing them to wither away and die on their own. That tends to bring suffering. And as a veterinarian, I do not want animals to suffer. And hopefully, if you're watching this talk, you don't want animals to suffer either. So, if you end up with a senior animal that's sort of declining in its older age, then like I said, that's something to think about. Quality of life. I like to have a calendar, and I mark off good days and bad days. And when we start to see more bad days than good days, and that's when we start to think about making a choice for these guys. So sorry to end on a little bit of a sad note, but I love senior animals and I love managing them. It just depends on kind of what their quality of life is. But I think that was all that I had today. I really appreciate you guys letting me ramble on for as long as I have. I've got some of my contact info down here. Feel free to reach out if you've got anything after this talk, and then I will obviously stay and answer questions. And then I'm just going to put up this resources slide. Your best resource is going to be your veterinarian. Hopefully you got that from the talk. Hopefully I conveyed that well enough. And then we've got some other websites up here and a podcast on there as well that I really like for all of these species to get some more information. There we go. Oh, hopefully Jen. Oh yeah, there we go. Jen's still here. Okay.
I am here. Thank you. This is fantastic. We really appreciate everybody attending, but also all of this amazing information. And we have screenshots that we will, of course, post in our Facebook as well as in our, okay. Oh my goodness, my computer's doing this again.
Oh no, well, I can still see you if that helps.
Thank you, Dr. Speziok. Please feel free to put your presentation back up so everyone has your contact information, as mine is being wonky yet again. I'm not sure what's happening there.
Do you mind just making me
but
a speaker again, if you can?
So does anyone who is with us, please feel free to unmute and ask any questions that you may have jotted down during this time. Okay.
Gotta love computers.
And I apologize once again for the technical challenges that seem to be haunting us today.
It's just one of those days. There was an eclipse the other day, and I think that has messed up
I'm
like
not
everything.
sure what is happening.
Well, I don't think I can reshare my my screen at the moment, but yeah, if you have questions, feel free to unmute. I'm happy to answer them. Or I think we're going to put screenshots up of the contact info, but I am Sarah Beth, the mixed animal vet, on basically
We are
everything.
having a little bit of weather here in Chicago.
Oh, that's probably why.
So I'm wondering if that is what is affecting this. And if it is, I sincerely apologize. It looks like we're coming back in. I do see a few people up, so I appreciate that.
Let's see.
Okay,
Back, hopefully.
I am back.
Yay! Perfect. I haven't seen any or heard any questions, so I think they may be good. But I don't know if you're able to put the contact slide up, or if you make me a speaker, I can, or like presenter, I can do that too. Oh, I think you're muted on this one. You were unmuted a second ago, but now you're muted. All right, there we go. Slides are up. I think you're still showing as muted. I don't know if it'll come up or not.
Okay, here we go.
There we go.
See, my evil alter ego popped on there for a minute. I'm not sure what happened there. Um, so if anyone has any questions, please do jump in. I apologize. We just had some blizzard-esque snowfall pop out of nowhere up here this morning. So I don't know if that had something to do with it, but we will share Dr. Speziok. So there we go. Okay. There is her contact information as well as so Dr. Speziok, can you tell us just for a couple seconds about the practice that you're with and the wonderful educational resources that they offer?
Yeah, definitely. So I work at Springhill Equine, so we've got our contact info there. Um, we are really, really passionate about education, and so if you follow us on Facebook or Instagram, it's gonna be the same name on both of them. Our Facebook is probably more active. We do a trivia question every week called What's Up Wednesday, and then we do seminars once a month. We just did one this past week on both equine and small animal nutrition. So we do seminars all the time. We put up a lot of really good information. And then our YouTube channel is the star of the show. We have got some really, really good videos on there of seminars about like bandaging and horse food and all kinds of things. And then they also just started a series called Horse Girl Goes to the Vet, which is hilarious. I highly recommend you check it out. Going over some of the pitfalls of people, going to the vet with their horse and maybe doing the wrong thing. So yeah, we love to educate and teach We also love to take externs and volunteers. If anybody ever ends up in the North Florida area, you can go to the website there and there's a contact us tab. If you're a pre-vet student or a vet student or anything like that, we're more than happy to have you ride along with us.
Oh, what a great opportunity. Thank you for sharing that.
For sure.
And we are very excited to share that our topic next month is equine allergies and fighting summer bugs. So we will be welcoming Dr. Erica Latcher, also from Springhill Equine, and Dr. Erica Machtinger from Penn State University, who will be educating us on how to help our horses minimize allergies and every equine's nemesis, the summer bug invasion. So please join us on May 20th to learn the science behind the methods of managing your routines for animal care and farm maintenance to improve summertime for you and your horses. Or if you are in Florida, like Dr. Speziok is, all year round. Now,
Exactly.
do you have bugs and insects that bother animals all year long? Does it get more intense in the summer?
Yes and yes. We have bugs
Okay.
literally all year round. But then yes, like we are entering the gnat season, and then love bug
Uh,
season as well. But those bother us more than the animals. But then the flies are getting really bad this time of year as well. So it never goes away. It only gets worse. So Dr. Latcher and Dr.
no.
McIntyre both are great.
Don't tell us that because everyone up here in the frozen tundra believes that there are no bugs in the south and it's just beautiful and 70 and sunny and we all have plans to go down there. So please don't disavow us of that.
It is beautiful. Sometimes it's 70. It's always sunny, except for when it's raining. And we have solutions for bugs that you'll learn about at that talk. So you can still come visit.
Excellent. We will have to do that. And then just there are a few upcoming events for those of you who may be physically near Haas in Northern Illinois. Next weekend, April 29th, on Saturday from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., is our second annual Tackapalooza event. People have purchased table space to sell their own, perhaps outgrown or unused tack and horse supplies, while others have brought saddles and trailers to sell on a consignment basis. Haas's own tack shop will be open as well, and there will be farm tours to meet all of our animals at 11, 12, 1, and 2. Thanks to a generous grant from the American Association of Equine Practitioners, on May 20th and 21st, HAHS is hosting local first responders for a large animal rescue operations training by the University of Illinois Fire Service Institute. More information can be found on the HAHS website at www.hahs.org/event. And finally, just a reminder that all of the Saturday Seminar Series episodes are recorded, which can be found on HAHS's YouTube channel. Simply search Hooved Animal Humane Society and be sure you see the tree and horse logo. We have 13 episodes plus today's, which will be up shortly, in the library that are perfect for rainy days or perhaps just to listen to as you do barn chores. A year ago this month, we talked to Dr. Ann McCombs about first aid on the farm and Dr. Kevin Klein about toxic plants to keep an eye out for around your paddocks and property overall. Don't forget to click the subscribe button so you get a notification when this episode gets uploaded and is ready to share with anyone you know who could not make it this morning. If you haven't already, please like and follow the Hooved Animal Humane Society on social media so you will get the latest posts on events and the adorable animals on the Haas farm. So Dr. Speziok, we have one more question for you. As all good podcasts and series do, we have sort of our signature question that we ask everybody. What was your favorite book when you were a child?
Ooh.
Perhaps it was the one that inspired you down this career path, or just the one that springs to mind?
Ooh. That's a great question. I I decided I wanted to be a vet before I could read, so it wasn't a book that inspired me to be a vet because that decision was made a very long time ago. Um, I would say I really liked the Black Stallion series, that whole series of books. I was a horse girl. I am a horse girl at heart. And the Black Stallion series, kind of the whole thing was definitely one of my absolute favorites. I think all of my books were still in my mom's house, like that she hasn't gotten rid of them in case I want to read them again.
Right, exactly. And that's what we do with our parents' houses. They're just our treasure trove that we go back to. Well, thank you so much. If you have any additional resources to share, go ahead, email them. We're going to include them in our episode summary on YouTube and also in the Facebook event so people who discover our series later can come back and read those.
Sounds
So,
great.
last chance for any questions from anybody? All right. Thank you for joining us today to discuss
Thank
caring
you.
for goats and sheep and their camelid and cattle friends. We look forward to having Dr. Speziok back in the future to discuss some of the other animals she sees in her daily travels. And I encourage you to follow her Facebook page because just looking at her list from, I think it was Thursday, really she defines a mixed animal veterinarian. And I think she managed to hit every species on Thursday. So
Yep.
thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Speziok. And we hope everybody has a great rest of your weekend. We'll see you next month on May 20th. Bye bye.